So welcome everyone and good evening. My name is Amy Schnur. I'm one of the proud founders of Burlington Green Environmental Association and serve as the executive director. And I'm also a volunteer with the new Burlington Community Climate Action Hub, which is co-hosting this evening's event. On behalf of Burlington Green and the Burlington Community Climate Action Hub, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us for what I hope will be an informative and engaging experience for everyone. Next slide, please, Ali. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. As stewards of the earth, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions and land and water, plants, animals, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on the land since time immemorial, and we recognize their leadership in protecting and caring for Mother Earth. In Burlington, our work with the community takes place within the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, represented by Treaty 14 and 19, and on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples. We honor these rightful caretakers of this sacred land surrounding the Great Lakes, and we are grateful for their teachings. And of course, we encourage you all to learn from and about Indigenous community where you live and how you can meaningfully honor the calls to action for truth and reconciliation. Okay, next slide, please, Ali. I'd like to thank BG team members, Ali and Kelly, who are at Control Center tonight, making sure everything goes tickety-boo for all of us. As I mentioned, tonight's webinar is being recorded, so no need to take notes. Plus, we'll be sending along a follow-up email to all registrants with a link to the recorded webinar. And we'll also be providing some helpful climate action related resources and links for everybody. As you probably noticed, everybody's mics and videos will remain turned off during the evening so that we can all sit back and enjoy the presentation without distraction. You can, however, and we encourage you to post your comments you may have in the chat function located for most of you should be typically at the bottom of your screen. And during and after the presentation, we invite you to submit your questions for our speaker in the Q&A function, which you'll also see located at the bottom of your screen. So comments in the chat, questions in the Q&A. And if any of you experience any technical difficulties during this evening's event, you can let us know by posting your issue in the chat function. And you can direct any of those technical questions to Kelly. Maybe Kelly, you could pop in and say hi in the chat so they know who you are. You're recognized there. Thanks, Kelly. And if you would prefer, if you have technical issues, you can also pop an email to bg@burlingtongreen.org, which you see at the top of the screen. And Kelly's monitoring that in case anybody wants to reach out that way. Okay, next slide, please, Ali. This evening's event is brought to you, as I mentioned, by Burlington Green and the new Burlington Community Climate Action Hub. Next slide. For those of you not familiar with Burlington Green, since 2007, our nonpartisan environmental charity has collaborated with all sectors of the community, applying our AAA, or awareness, advocacy, and action approach to make a positive difference right here in Burlington. Next slide, please. And earlier this year, we launched a new initiative, the Burlington Community Climate Action Hub, which is a resident-driven, nonpartisan community movement focused on local action on climate change. And you can see the current Hub's founding members pictured here. And I'd like to thank Jane and Scott and Anna and Jacqueline and Jenna and Melissa and Ali for all of your passion and your efforts to get this new opportunity off the ground. And we'll be sure to include a link in that follow-up email to where you can learn more about getting involved with both Burlington Green and the Hub. And now I would like to invite Scott Kirby from the Hub to launch an interactive poll and introduce tonight's very special guest speaker. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks everybody for joining. And as Amy said, before we get started, before we introduce Grant, we'd like to invite you to participate in this quick poll. Which of the following options best describes your current understanding of climate change and the climate change crisis? So Ali, if you could please launch that poll. So do you have a strong understanding of it, a good understanding, you don't fully understand it, you're beginning to understand it, or not at all? So let's give everybody 30 seconds or so to get those votes in. Okay, now Ali, on my side, I can't actually see the results populating for me. I don't know if you can see them on your side.
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, so how
I'm
are we
gonna
doing,
end
Ali?
the poll now. We're good. I think we got like 94% of the votes. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll now.
Perfect. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks, Ali, for populating that. So it looks like the majority of people are sort of in that good understanding stage, but we have a lot of people that are here to learn more, which is awesome. That being said, let's learn some more. So Ali, if you don't mind just going ahead to the next slide. So we're so pleased to welcome Grant Linney to engage and empower us all this evening. Grant is a climate activist, educator, and veteran climate reality leader, informing and engaging audience from far and wide through 687 presentations and counting. So thank you very much for joining us, Grant, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. And I've got a lot of ground I'd like to cover with you, so I'm going to jump in. I am going to share screen, and I'm probably, I need permission to share screen. So if I can get that from the host.
Sorry about that, Grant. You should have permission and everything good to go now.
This will, yep, okay, let's see what happens. There we go. And I'm gonna do this, and I am going to find the right button. Where is play? Stop video. Isn't that funny? All these different things, and I don't see play.
There is a play button right up in the top, Grant, just to the left of the middle.
Left of the middle. Chat,
So go,
Q&A, polls, new share. I don't
so do you
see
go
it.
just keep on going left?
Going
and you should
left.
see it there. Yep.
Participants, stop
Right
video. Stop video. Okay, and that.
I think maybe we're seeing a different screen than you are, because it is showing play where we're looking.
Okay. Isn't that interesting? Okay. What I will do is go to the play function, and you can tell me, have you got the full screen?
Yes, we do.
Yay. Okay. So this is me and my prior persona as an outdoor and environmental educator. My last classroom was 400 acres in size, and instead of whiteboards and chairs and desks, I had forests and ponds and streams and a 450-acre classroom, which I totally loved. I love to take kids out in the midst of nature and introduce them to what our natural environment is all about. One of my favorite studies was a river study. And we often did it with grade 5s. Some of you might remember that there was a TV program called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And I would, the night before the stream study, because these kids were staying overnight, I would put on the board, true or false, trout need trees. Now, for a 10-year-old, that's a jarring question, and they're surprised. And I would get about a 50-50 vote on this. Some of the kids would be quite literal and say, nope, never seen a trout in a tree. And other kids would say, I think there's some kind of a connection, but I'm not sure. And I would just leave it hanging. And then the next day we would be going down to the Credit River. The picture you see is taken on the bridge over the river. And you can see that students are involved in catching. And of course, as 10-year-olds, they are really interested in the living things, not so much the trees. I bring in the trees later. So I've got them in different groups, and I tell them to stay in their groups, and we're all taking samples, and then we'll take a look at what each group has found, and we'll make sure that we share our results with everyone. So there's a crayfish, there's a darter, and there is a stonefly nymph. And I would actually give them a target number. I would say, if we can find 10 or more different species between the various groups, that's a thumbs up. That's a good sign. And of course, I'm introducing the concept of biodiversity here. And then I would talk about certain critters as indicator species. So for example, the stonefly nymph on the white spoon is a very positive indicator species. It only lives in high-class neighborhoods, very healthy ecosystems. And they also happen to be trout food. So chances are there are trout in this section of the river if we catch stonefly nymph. So indicator species, numbers of species, maybe noticing the trees, maybe teasingly saying, do you notice any trout in the trees? And then that night, going back to the trees. And if it had been a hot day, I might ask the kids if they had sought shade from the sun in the trees. And I would talk about how significant that was to the river ecosystem, that in a hot summer, that shade helps to keep the water temperature below a threshold of 20 degrees Celsius. And that's connected to the oxygen content in the water. Trout need a minimum of 9 milligrams per liter of oxygen, as do stonefly nymphs. A carp or a sucker needs a third of that, 3 milligrams per liter. A minnow needs 6 milligrams per liter. So you can see the trout are pretty fussy. And then we would talk about the roots of the tree. And of course, this is unseen when you're doing the river study. But when you think about the roots, you realize they have an impact 2 ways in terms of preventing erosion. They keep the water clear, deep, and fast flowing. They keep the bottom of the river gravel as opposed to covered with silt from erosion. And of course, trout spawn in the gravel, and they also find stonefly nymphs in that gravel or stones. The stonefly nymph would not be there if it was the silt bottom. And finally, trees provide food themselves, insects that will fly low over the water, and then the fish jumps. What I was doing here, and I'm not sure I was aware of it for a while, but I was teaching the kids about connections, and I was teaching them about what we call ecosystem thinking, that everything is connected. So yes, trout do need trees. And in my own thinking, if there is something called ecosystem thinking, I believe there's also something called ecosystem feeling, which comes from spending time outdoors. It gives you a chance to develop an affect, an affinity, an empathy, a connection that is on the feeling end of things, and that is very powerful. And is a compelling argument for outdoor and environmental education, I might add. It's interesting, science is, whether it's physics, chemistry, or biology, it's all about connections. And that's really what we teach in an outdoor education center. It's not just scientists who say that, though. These are the words of a modern day theologian by the name of Parker Palmer. To be is to be in relation. This picture could be titled with Parker Palmer's quote. This is a group of grade 11, 12 high school students from a school in Guelph on a canoe trip in September as part of their program. And you can see they're very much in relation with each other. There's a guitar, they're hanging out after supper, and they're in this gorgeous setting. And it all adds up to this relationship. I found this recently and it blew me away. This is a whole new level of to be is to be in relation. And we lose track of this so easily. And even when we're well-intentioned and we decide we're going to go with an electric vehicle, sometimes we don't get it. Do we really need an all-electric tank? Is this vehicle a way of being in relation with the environment that it is driving over? Or is it conquering that environment? Is it a completely different relationship? This is from Fortino's Loblaws. You can see the various names there and so on. And you'll notice the offer is from November 4th to November 10th. So you might want to rush out after this presentation, because you can get additional optimum points on selected holiday decor. Okay, and this is all part of it's the title that really gets me. Let's crave more. And notice it's trademarked, as if somebody would want to actually trademark that. This is so counter to the idea of being in relation. This is from The Guardian, which is a highly respected British paper, and it was quite recent. It was this week, and there was a poll of 10 countries and asking people about their views on environment, and people were pretty self-satisfied with what they were already doing and saying, I don't think I really need to do much more, which is a bit sad to hear that. I found it very interesting that this article has on the right-hand side an ad for Canada's top wealth advisors. It just seems a contradiction to have that. And I don't know whether the Guardian's aware of the contradiction that they have. I love this cartoon. When life is over, we really don't take an inventory of our crap, of our material possessions. We remember relationships, and that's what's really important. And somehow we need to do a better job of remembering those relationships while we're living. So, yes, we have encountered a problem. This isn't a problem with my computer. This is a problem with civilization. And it's not quite as simple as pressing OK on a computer screen to restart. Scientists tell us it is still possible to restart, but there is a time limit on it. And we've got to get a move on. This past summer was a graphic example of the climate change that is going on and that will continue to go on. So we all know about Lytton, Canada's all-time heat record, actually 3 days in a row of really hot temperatures, and then the fire, not only happening in Canada and North America, California, Oregon, BC, but also in Europe and Italy, Turkey, and a number of places, Spain, were on fire. And here's the all-time heat record for Europe this past summer. And headlines about the Canadian Inferno: northern heat exceeds worst case climate models. The scientists did not see this coming. And then the subheadline: scientists fear heat domes in North America and Siberia indicate a new dimension to the global crisis. Well, the very word heat domes is a new dimension. I hadn't heard that before this summer. And basically it's heat sitting for an extended time over one stationary spot. Another headline: nowhere is safe, warning on escalating climate crisis. Subheadline: as extreme heat claims hundreds of lives in the US and Canada, experts say time is running out to take action. And that time factor is becoming critical. This is a picture of a home in California. Probably 15 minutes before this picture was taken, the home was intact. 10 minutes from now, it will be gone. It's a particularly graphic illustration to me of what extreme weather events do. And it's not just fire. In Germany, record amounts of rainfall in a very short period of time. And this is the aftermath in a German town. Mud-strewn streets and materials thrown out of storefronts and apartments that have been flood damaged and are no longer of use. And this is a city of 10.5 million people in China with half to two-thirds, I would say 2/3 submerged vehicles. And this city is known for its manufacture of iPhones. So there's no doubt climate change is happening. And as a trained climate reality presenter, we normally deal with three questions: must we change? Can we change? Will we change? And I add on the part in time. And the science, first of all, is the best way we have of understanding the world around us. And it's quite unequivocal about saying we must change. And I'm going to share a clip from probably the most famous living scientist of this day, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
And when you have people who don't know much about science standing in denial of it and rising to power, that is a recipe for the complete dismantling of our informed democracy. One of the great things about science is that it is an entire exercise in finding what is true. Their hypothesis, you test it, I get a result. A rival of mine double checks it because they think I might be wrong. They perform an even better experiment than I did, and they find out, hey, this experiment matches. Oh my gosh, we're onto something here. And out of this rises a new emergent truth. It does it better than anything else we have ever come up with as human beings. This is science. It's not something to toy with. It's not something to say, I choose not to believe equals MC squared. You don't have that option. When you have an established scientific emergent truth, it is true whether or not you believe in it. And the sooner you understand that, the faster we can get on with the political conversations about how to solve the problems that face us.
You may have noticed a slight tone of exasperation. Dr. Tyson goes on to say that human-caused climate change is an emergent truth. In other words, there really is no debate about that. The debate now is, what are we going to do about it? So what refutes science? Better science. Probably a recent example would be that for a good period of time, scientists thought that we could raise the average surface temperature of the planet from 14 degrees to 16, that we could raise it by 2 degrees. Well, we've raised it by 1.2 already, and scientists have looked at that carefully, and they've done a big OMG. Look at all the extreme weather events that are happening at 1.2. Based on the data we have, we are now saying that the safe ceiling is 1.5. Notice what does not refute science. My favorite is probably the last one. And then Dr. Tyson, I really like that he makes this link. I am often talking to grade 10 students because they have a unit on climate change. And of course, in their science, it doesn't talk about politics, but in grade 10, they have civics. And I say, you know what? We have to combine the two. Once science tells us we have a problem, we then have to enter the political arena and say, okay, what are we going to do about it? They go together. So the latest science, actually there's even some later stuff, but one of the most recent science documents came out in August from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a science body of both the UN and the World Meteorological Organization. 234 scientists were involved in the 6th assessment. They all came from IPCC member governments. There's 195 of them. That's practically every nation on the planet. They didn't create science. They reviewed more than 14,000 scientific studies for the report. And they summarized the data, and they came up with conclusions which were actually pretty conservative, because the politicians get involved too, and they tend to want to water down the statements. Even given that, they all agreed that we're at a point of extreme urgency where we need deeds, not just words. Some of their key takeaways: human influence has unequivocally warmed the planet. I'm going to go down to number 3. We are now locked into 30 years of worsening climate impacts, regardless of what we do. In other words, this past summer is going to repeat, and it's going to get worse. And we need to realize we have already set that course in motion for at least another 30 years. Number 5, there is still a window in which humans can alter the climate path. That window is closing quickly. Just in terms of the 30-year lock-in, this is a graph from the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, and it looks at the number of hot days in a year. It defines a hot day as a day with a maximum temperature above 30 degrees Celsius. I want you to look at London, which is London, Ontario, not London, England, in the middle of the graph. You will notice there's 4 colors: blue, yellow, orange, and red. And those 4 colors correspond to 4 different periods of time. Blue is in the past, 1961 to 1990. Yellow, orange, and red are projections into the future based on computer models, based on current trends. So for London, between 1961 and 1990, the average number of days over 30 degrees Celsius per year was 8, just over a week. I often would ask students, okay, there's nothing for between 1991 and 2019. Do you think that number's gone up or down? And the students would invariably say up. Well, in actual fact, London in 2020 reached 22 days, as per the prediction, of days over 30 degrees Celsius. So the prediction for 2020 to 2040 has already become a reality. The next prediction of 2041 to 2069, I think we can say, based on what the IPCC has said, is locked in, and it's at 37. And if we continue the way we are looking at 68 days per year in London, Ontario, over 30 degrees Celsius by as early as 2080, maybe even earlier. 68 days, that's all of July, all of August, spill over into June and or September. That's insane. That's where we're headed. The Simpsons had to weigh in, I think that's a very telling. So must we change? I don't think there's any doubt about that. Can we change? You know what? There's no doubt about that either. And I would strongly recommend the website. You don't need to buy the book because the website is actually more current than the book. Paul Hawken has assembled a group of scientists who have come up with between 80 and 100 different steps to reverse global warming, to draw down carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. It lists them, it ranks them, it describes them. The ranking is very interesting. And again, I encourage you to go to the website to see the explanation behind the ranking. So wind is actually ahead of solar, which surprised me. And then the next three really surprised me. Reduced food waste is number 3. Plant-rich diets is number 4. Health and education of women and girls in certain third world countries is number 5. And the list goes on. And there's an explanation for each one of them. So it's an eye-opener. And there actually is a new book by Paul Hawken. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. It's called Regeneration. And I think it's an expansion on what he's doing here. This is the trickiest question. This is the scariest question. Will we change given human nature? Will we change in time? We need to, this is the title of an excellent book, and a couple of things about it. Number one, I really like the title, The Future We Choose. And we need to understand that right now, as we continue to drive internal combustion vehicles, and as we continue to heat our houses with fossil gas, and I use the word fossil gas instead of natural gas because it is a fossil fuel, we are choosing our future. And it's not a good future. We have to choose otherwise. The first author, Christiana Figueres, is a stunning example of the kind of female leadership that we need to hear from and see more and more of. She is a very poised woman. She was the chief negotiator at the Paris Climate Summit. She is the daughter of the Prime Minister of Costa Rica. She's just a wise soul and the kind of person we need in the climate fight. We are making choices right now. And quite frankly, I am at this stage very disappointed with what's coming out of COP26. The proposals are not nearly substantive enough. Late breaking news, apparently John Kerry from the United States and the senior negotiator from China made a joint announcement today, which has some promise. There usually is a scurry towards the end. I sure hope there is with this one. This came out from Carbon Tracker, a climate action tracker, which is very highly regarded scientific organization. They produced this yesterday, and they are basically saying that based on current commitments, we are locked in to scenario 3, 2.4 degrees. That's not only above 1.5, which is our new ceiling, it's above 2. It is not a good scenario. So we've got to make stronger promises, and we've got to show that we will keep these promises. You all know that expression. We don't seem to really understand what it means. The two characters at the high end of the boat are illustrating what I would call bozo thinking. I'm sure glad the hole isn't in our end. It goes back to everything is connected, and realizing that when a catastrophe happens in one part of the world, it's going to happen elsewhere. This is my second video, and it shows a typical morning wake up with mom and dad and two kids, except there's something going on in the house.
Wake up, honey.
I'm gonna stay at the office till about 6:30 tonight.
I know, they'll swim for us.
Lunch is there. Good day.
I continue to be stunned by that video every time I watch it. If our house really was on fire, we would have certain primitive parts of our brain that would go off, and the adrenaline would flow, and we would act very quickly. Climate change is relatively, in our psyche, a slow motion event. In Earth time, it is very fast. We need to use education to realize that it is an emergency on the par of a house being on fire, and that we've got to react. This is what it's about. And we need to get really personal, whether this is our own kids or our grandkids or nephews and nieces, or like me as a teacher, the kids I worked with. We've got to realize what is at stake. So what are the key messages we need to get across in conveying this emergency? Climate change, it really needs to be called a climate emergency. Now, the politicians have co-opted this. They're very good at using the word. They do not seem to understand what the word implies. Emergency means action. Emergency means action now, not talking about it. I'm going to go through a really quick flow chart with you. You'll notice at the bottom it says G. Linney and some dates, and it also says H. Barker. Howard Barker was a neighbor of mine who is a cloud physicist. I didn't even know such a profession existed. He works on climate change for Environment Canada. He helped me with this. So the first circle is the major problem, the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, and that leads to what's called human-caused or anthropogenic global warming. When we burn fossil fuels and we cut down trees, we release carbon dioxide, and substantial amounts of that carbon dioxide go up into the atmosphere. They make our natural greenhouse blanket, which is actually a good thing, but they make that blanket thicker and they cause global warming. So we've got heat, we've got melt, we've got the loss of land ice in Greenland, Antarctica, Baffin Island, certain parts of the Arctic. And when ice melts off land and goes into the water, we have rising sea levels. To give you an idea of scale here, Greenland is about a tenth the size of Antarctica. If all the ice on Greenland melted, worldwide sea levels would go up 7 meters. The United Nations has figured out that for every 1 meter of sea level increase, there will be more than 100 million refugees, people who will have to leave seaside villages, towns, and cities because they're flooded out. So you can see a chain reaction here. The ice in the Arctic is mainly sea ice because it's already floating in the water. It does not cause rising sea level when it melts. However, both the loss of land ice and sea ice cause global extreme weather events. The loss of ice in the Arctic affects the drought in California. And I remember when I first heard that, my brain was going, what? And again, it's this whole idea of connections. And that ice in the Arctic and Antarctica is the cooling system of the planet. And when you lose it, you disrupt the operating systems of the planet. And that leads to extreme weather events, whether it's flooding or it's drought. It's all connected. The loss of ice, white ice reflects light and therefore heat. When that ice melts and it's replaced by dark water, that dark water absorbs the light and therefore the heat. And that's why you've got black arrows going back to heat and then of course more melt. And that's called a positive feedback loop. There's another positive feedback loop with the loss of permafrost, permanently frozen ground on Baffin Island in Siberia. When that ground thaws out, additional greenhouse gases that have been frozen in there are released. They go up into the atmosphere, they make the blanket thicker, and we get another positive feedback loop, more heat, more melt. I'm going to get rid of those black arrows because I need the space. A warming planet means that glaciers all over the planet are disappearing. And in this case, when they melt, it doesn't lead to flooding. It leads to the lack of water for both human and crops supplies. And that's a very significant impact. Extreme heat, as we saw last summer, the spread of disease. When I'm talking to grade 10s, I say, when you were born, there was no such thing as West Nile virus or Lyme disease in Ontario. These exist now because of milder winters, and the bugs that carry these diseases can survive our winters, direct result of climate change. Warmest 19 years on record are all in the 2000s. Crops are affected by heat. The oceans, two things are happening to the oceans. Number one, they're warming up. Number two, 93% of the carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation actually goes into the oceans. And that carbon dioxide reacts with salt water to form carbonic acid. We are acidifying the oceans, and that is killing coral reefs, other animals, including fisheries. So it's having a catastrophic effect on the oceans. Humans, we might think, oh, well, we're just watching this. No, we aren't. Of course, we're affected by the spread of disease, by crop failures, by too much water, by too little water. All of this impacts us. And all these red circles, which are human impacts, point back to the burning of fossil fuels and the cutting down of trees. In other words, we have totally nailed the problem. We know what it is. Therefore, we know the solution, and we shouldn't be beating around the bush. We have to, and this is really hard for people who want to make money by digging it up, but we have to keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground, and we've got to keep a lot more trees in the ground. How do we get our message across? We've got to remember this, okay? What Dr. Tyson said, we've got to connect science with political action, and we've got to focus on political action. We need to be mad rather than sad. Sad causes us to curl up and feel depressed and inactive. Mad goes, damn it, I want to do something. Mad motivates, and that's what we need. We need to speak up loudly and now and express concern for our own future. I'm in my 70s. I'm still concerned about my own future, let alone all the kids I've taught. We have to demand action. We have to realize that speaking up includes conversations, letters, op-eds, protest marches, litigation, voting. I should also add that All these speaking ups can be on multiple levels. They can be on the local community level, the province or state, and of course, nationally. And this all adds up to a word that is not a dirty word to me. I'm proud to call myself an activist. An activist is someone who goes, damn it, I want to do something about this. When I ask people to speak up, I need them to realize who is already there. Yeah, there's one guy off on his own, thank goodness. Hopefully he doesn't reappear. There are a whole bunch of people at COP26. They're not doing enough. We need to be on them. We need to be booting them in the butt and incessantly at them. We don't just wait for voting day. We need to realize that there are, and this is a partial list, there's many more. There's major international companies that have, number one, made a commitment to net zero in their own operations. And number two, are looking at net zero in terms of the products they produce. So we need to spread this good news and tell other companies, hey, why aren't you doing like Tesla? Why aren't you doing like Nike? Maersk is the largest shipping line in the world. It's from Denmark. They have made a commitment to get rid of bunker crude, which is a nasty fossil fuel, and replace it with a non-carbon emitting fuel. One example. The United States military is the largest in the world. They recognize climate change as a threat multiplier. It makes all the other things in red worse. The previous president, whose name shall remain unmentioned, had ordered his military not to address climate change, and they basically ignored him. They said, we have to, this is a threat multiplier. Human-induced climate change is a scientific reality. Its decisive mitigation is a moral and religious imperative for humanity. I am a non-Catholic. I am a great fan of Pope Francis because he has led the way for all major religions to issue similar statements. So we've got prominent politicians, we've got the military, we've got businesses, we've got our religious leaders. They're all saying the same thing. Most people won't realize that Pope Francis has a background in chemistry. And of course, he also has the theological training for the moral and religious imperative part. And then there are young people, and they are awesome. And I love this sign, which was taken in downtown Hamilton, near where I live. And their superstar, you should all know by name. She started as a 15-year-old in August 2018. Sweden school starts early in August as opposed to September. And she took the first 2 weeks of school for a strike. An election had just been announced, and she thought, okay, I'm going to draw attention to climate, and I'm going to show up at the Swedish Parliament buildings in my yellow raincoat and with my sign, School Strike for Climate. And the press noticed her, and she got some coverage, and the politicians were embarrassed, and they ordered her off public grounds. They said, you can't be here. So she walked across the street to a public park. The media easily found her there and asked her why she moved. And boy, did scat ever, to use a scientific term, scat really hit the fan. The politicians were very embarrassed when the story came out that they had ordered her off the grounds. 1 year later, Greta is in Denmark, Copenhagen, in front of 15,000 people. 1 month later, after sailing across the ocean because she refused the carbon footprint of a plane flight, she's in Montreal, Canada, 500,000 people. 500,000 people. She started as an individual. She has had an impact. I love the quote. We are doing this because we will not be bystanders. That's the opposite of an activist. We are doing this because we want the people in power to unite behind the science. And notice she said that in the oil capital of Canada. Here's a clip from Greta.
My name is Greta Thunberg, and I'm inviting you to be a part of the solution. 5 years ago, world leaders signed the Paris Agreement, and they promised to keep the global average temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue 1.5 degrees to safeguard future living conditions. Since then, a lot has happened. But the action needed is still nowhere in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years following the Paris Agreement have been the 5 hottest years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more than 200 gigatons of CO2. Commitments are being made, distant hypothetical targets are being set, and big speeches are being given. Yet, when it comes to the immediate action we need, we are still in a state of complete denial, as we waste our time creating new loopholes with empty words and creative accounting. If you read through the current best available science, you realize that the climate and ecological crisis cannot be solved without system change. That's no longer an opinion, that's a fact. The climate crisis is only a part of a bigger sustainability crisis. For too long, we have been distancing ourselves from nature, mistreating the planet, our only home, living as if there was no tomorrow. At the current emission rate, our remaining CO2 budget for 1.5 degrees will be completely gone within 7 years, long before we'll even have a chance to deliver on our 2030 or 2050 targets. But I'm telling you, there is hope. Because the people have not yet been made aware. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. Nor can we treat something like a crisis unless we understand the emergency. So let's make this our main priority. Let's unite and spread awareness. Once we become aware, then we can act. Then change will come. This is the solution. We are the hope. We, the people.
She's brilliant. Creating new loopholes with empty words and unfulfilled promises. And that's what's going on far too much. And Greta has now coined the phrase blah, blah, blah to describe that. She talks about, since we're not really understanding our house is on fire, that we need to use awareness of what's at stake. People do not understand enough. She talks about system change, and that feeds into what I regard as a very famous quote from Al Gore, who's the founder of the Climate Reality Project and a former vice president. It's more important to change laws than light bulbs. In other words, it's more important to bring about system change than personal change. Yes, you can go to Home Depot and decide to get LED bulbs to replace your incandescent or fluorescent bulbs. But how much better would it be if there was a law that made incandescence and fluorescence obsolete by such and such a date, and we all bought LEDs. And that's the kind of system, we're at this point of urgency where we need that kind of system change. This is from The Economist, and it's a very graphic cartoon to me. There we are duking it out with the coronavirus, and it's been a long struggle, and we're pretty evenly matched, and we're hopefully prevailing. Look who's waiting on the ropes. And it's true, and we need to be up to the challenge. With COVID, we have amply demonstrated system change. So all the things that are listed here are initiatives taken by the government on our behalf, and they will hopefully land up in a positive outcome. Now, when you look at climate change, the record, yes, we've declared an emergency, but after that, the record is much more spotty. There's far too many X's, and we're not going to be successful until we change those X's into check marks. An excellent video, and I'm aware of time, but I'm going to show it to you because it's so well done, and it compares the World War II mobilization to what we need to do now with climate change.
There is no home in Canada, no family, and no individual whose fortunes and freedom are not bound up in the present struggle.
That's Prime Minister Mackenzie King speaking to Canadians at the outset of the Second World War. Today, another existential threat looms over us, the climate emergency. But don't worry, this is a hopeful video about what it would look like to unite to rapidly and dramatically lower our emissions and give future generations a fighting chance for a good life on a safer, more equitable planet. Impossible? Tell that to those who rallied in the face of fascism 80 years ago. In just a few years, Canada transformed our entire economy to meet the challenge and produce what was required. By the time victory was declared, we'd manufactured more military vehicles than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Compare that to the current emergency. Here's Canada's greenhouse gas emissions since we committed to cutting them. And here's where we now urgently need to go. So what needs to happen here to truly assume our generation's calling to get off fossil fuels? World War II gives us 4 markers for when a government has genuinely shifted into emergency mode. Marker number 1, it spends what it takes to win. When pressed about the unprecedented tenfold increase in government spending, the minister overseeing Canada's World War II military production, C.D. Howe, famously replied, "If we lose the war, nothing will matter."
This is the largest economic program in Canada's history.
In the face of the COVID pandemic, Canada's governments have spent what was required. Deficits be damned.
Canada hasn't seen this type of civic mobilization since the Second World War.
It turns out, when our governments recognize an emergency, the money is there. But public spending on climate action pales in comparison. That needs to be ramped up, way up. Just like in 1939, when Canada's military started from a base of virtually nothing.
The permanent forces in the 30s were pathetically small and ill-equipped. The army had only 4,000 men and 2 tanks.
Enter our second marker for taking emergencies seriously. The government creates new economic institutions to get the job done. Once World War II was declared, Canadians pumped out a volume of military equipment that is simply mind-blowing. 800,000 military vehicles, over 700 ships, and 16,000 military aircraft, creating the 4th largest air force in the world at the time. The government established 28 crown corporations, public enterprises purpose-built to meet the task at hand. To get off fossil fuels, we'll need a massive number of heat pumps, solar arrays, wind farms, insulation manufacturers, electric buses, and other sustainable technologies. And we'll need a new generation of public corporations to build and deploy them. Marker number 3, government shift from voluntary policies to mandatory measures. In World War II, the transformation of our economy wasn't voluntary, it was required. But on climate, we encourage change, we incentivize change, we offer rebates, we send price signals. But what we have decidedly not done is require change. By next year, no new buildings should be heated with fossil fuels. We should immediately ban the advertising of fossil fuel vehicles at gas stations, just like we did with cigarettes. And by 2025, it should be illegal to sell new combustion-powered vehicles. Which leads to marker number 4. The government tells the truth about the severity of the crisis and the measures necessary to combat it.
I appeal to my fellow Canadians to unite in a national effort to save from destruction all that makes life itself worth living, and to preserve for future generations those liberties and institutions which others have bequeathed to us.
The wartime leaders that led us to victory were forthright about the gravity of the crisis, yet still managed to impart hope. Their voices amplified by journalists, artists, and entertainers who knew what side of history they wanted to be on. In the face of the climate emergency, though, we have seen little of this consistency and coherence. Worse yet, our governments send contradictory messages every time they approve new fossil fuel infrastructure.
We're on our way to getting 3 new pipeline projects underway, which will help connect Canada's oil patch with energy markets around the world.
We need leaders to not just acknowledge the climate emergency, but to speak and act like it's a damn emergency. 4 markers of emergency mode. During the Second World War, the Canadian government hit all of them, big time. But on climate, we're 0 for 4.
In the months to come, these veterans must find their places in the life of Canada.
One last wartime lesson. Every great mobilization comes with a pledge to leave no one behind, that life after the fight will be brighter and more just.
A young country on the march needs the energies and devotion of all her fighting men and women for full employment, jobs all round. It's the post-war goal of every government.
The climate mobilization must include a jobs guarantee for everyone who wants one, and a just transition for all those whose livelihoods are tied to fossil fuels or who live on the front lines of the climate crisis, as part of an overarching commitment to tackling inequality. That's how we create common purpose. That's how we get everyone on the bus. This is the task of our lives, our generational opportunity to do something grand together. It's time to press our leaders into service. It's time to mobilize for the climate emergency.
I think I'm going to draw things to a conclusion at this point. I have more to cover, but I've given you a lot of material, and that video is a superb way to end. We need a giant mobilization. We need to devote our resources to what is clearly a climate emergency. And I should mention one of the things that I was going to show was an excellent op-ed that came from BurlingtonGreen and from the Community Climate Hub. Amy was involved, and there was another woman. I will let Amy give her credit. It was in the Hamilton Spectator last Saturday, and you can probably, if you haven't seen it, you can probably locate it on the Spectator website. It's excellent, and it has a number of steps such as the ones mentioned in this video and some additional ones that are very current. I am going to leave it at that, and I am going to see if I can close this. Actually, this is worth a quick mention. The video is based on this most excellent book, A Good War, Seth Klein, who is the brother of Naomi Klein. It's an obvious metaphor, but it really gets into great detail about what we need to do. And I'm going to exit now. And I'm hoping that's going to bring me back to you guys. And I'm going to turn things back to Scott.
Thank you very much, Grant. That was an amazing and very informative presentation. Personally, I really thought the slide where you looked at Canadian cities and the heat to the future was incredible. And I say that because I find a lot of people, when it comes to climate change, they think it's really far off in time, but also in geography. And it's an issue that impacts across the world more than it impacts at home, which is the opposite of the truth. And we know that Canada's warming faster than most of the world is. So really interesting to look at the city perspective there. So fantastic presentation. And again, thank you so much. And we'd love to hear from the audience as well. So if you haven't already done so, please feel free to put any questions you have for Grant in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can before, and we'll do one final poll as well after that. And we'll share some take action next steps with you as well. So I'm just going to pull up some questions for you here, Grant. Okay. So first question for you, Grant. How do we raise awareness of the reduce part of reduce, reuse, recycle? And can we shake planned obsolescence?
Oh boy. Good question. I don't have a ready answer. I think part of it is being aware of what really matters in our lives. And I love that cartoon. I should have bought more crap because it does serve as a reminder that really that isn't what's important in our lives. It's relationships. We have an advertising juggernaut that wants us to crave more, to buy more stuff, that equates happiness with possessions. And in our society, that's going to be pretty hard to overcome. I don't have an obvious answer on that, other than creating a greater awareness.
Okay. The next question here, and I'm going to maybe give you I'm going to give you a bit of an answer to it myself as well, but I'll let you answer too. What can the average person do to make the most impact? Biking, walking, planting trees, reducing consumption, these are all great, but they don't feel much in the face of companies and governments that refuse to make systemic change. And I mentioned I was going to give a bit of an answer because you talked about this book in the presentation, which is Drawdown. And I keep this book on my desk, like literally beside my computer. And I think that's a great spot where people can look. And on a personal level, there's so many things that jump out off the page that you talked about them. Reducing food waste. Plant-based diets is high in there as well. But those are just a few of my thoughts. What do you think, Grant?
Well, the idea of system change, to me, I mean, I'm making personal changes. I bought an electric vehicle. I'm getting a cold weather heat pump, so I'm not on natural gas. I am eating less meat, but I'm also aware that those personal changes are not enough. That I really need to speak up and do whatever I can to marshal system change and keep the pressure on the politicians. The more of us that speak up and say, hey, why aren't you doing more? The more impact it's going to have. So we've got to keep an eye on the big picture of system change, and we've got to put pressure create pressure in the political arena.
That's great. And just to add to that, I think one of the things that people can do is participating in events like today, right? It's learning and continuing to learn and continuing to talk and have these dialogues, right? So I think kudos to everybody for joining, for taking that step. The next question here, how will electric or hydrogen powered vehicles, personal vehicles, impact our efforts, assuming there's a wide scale uptake?
Green hydrogen is very exciting, not to be confused with gray or blue hydrogen. Green is not involving any fossil fuels in its creation. It's quite exciting because it can be used not only for vehicles, but also for aircraft. And it can be used for transport trucks. And it can be used for power plants. There's now one in Europe that is, instead of being powered by natural gas or fossil gas, it's powered by green hydrogen. So the outlook, I don't have particular facts and figures, but the outlook is very promising. And yes, there are some downsides to buying electric vehicles, rare earth minerals and so on, but my sense before I purchased an electric vehicle is that in the long run, I'm ahead to do that. And we all are. We've got to make the internal combustion engine obsolete.
That's great. Thank you, Grant. I have one more question here and one comment. And Jane's question here, and perhaps we can always connect offline if we need to as well. But Jane was asking, and said that she's found it hard to find suppliers who can do cold weather heat pumps. And you mentioned that you have gone through that transition to cold weather heat pump, and was just wondering about a supplier for that.
My email is climategrant@gmail.com. Depending on where you are, I know of somebody who does it in Dundas, and I would imagine they would go as far as Burlington. I'm having a renovation to the house right now, and another person is involved who I had to educate about these cold weather heat pumps, and he's now on site, and he's going to provide me with one. There are people out there, and I can help you with a Dundas contact if you'd like.
That's great. Thanks, Grant. And I see that Amy also added a comment there, referring to Jade Energy Solutions for heat pump information as well. So,
oh, great.
So Jane,
great.
So Jane, there's another option for you. Grant, one more question's come up, and the question reads, fantastic presentation. And my question is Grant hopeful?
I'm really waiting on pins and needles to see if COP26 pulls something through. I think it's pretty critical. I find it interesting that John Kerry and the senior negotiator from China had a joint conference, or actually they one had a press conference and the other one right after. So it wasn't joint, but it was the result of a joint effort, and it was announcing a further joint effort. So that's good. We need more of that. We're really coming down to the crunch. I'm on pins and needles. I sincerely hope. I can't afford to be sad. So I'm mad and I'm hopeful, and I'll keep going.
That's great, Grant. And questions keep on coming, and maybe we'll just do one more question before we go to the last poll.
Sure.
And the question is, this is more of a fun question, and I was wondering what you think is more eco-friendly, a real Christmas tree or a fake Christmas tree?
Oh, man.
I might be able to help you on this one, Grant, if you need a phone a friend on this.
I have personally chosen a fake one, and I've had it for 12 years. So I'm hoping that keeping it over the long term is a good thing. But Scott, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so I'm going to plug a different climate reality leader as well. His name's Eric Novak. And some of you might know Eric Novak. He does a lot of reviews on YouTube of electric vehicles, that kind of thing. But right. I remember he did a video on Christmas trees last year or a couple of years ago. So I can't recall the exact answer. I think there's a lot of pieces to the equation here, and it depends on things like how long you keep it, of course. But for anybody thinking about Christmas trees, go on YouTube and search for EnviroDad. I think that's Eric's handle, and I think you can find the Christmas tree video there.
Okay, good idea.
Okay, so on that note, we'd like to go to the next poll, the final poll of the night. So before we do that, we do want to again thank everybody for joining. Thank you again, Grant. This was great to have you with us tonight for our first hub presentation, our first hub event. And the BG team wants to thank you that one of the trees that's planted in 2022 will be planted in your honor, Grant, just to thank you for tonight's event.
Yay.
So that being said, after listening and learning from Grant's presentation, how motivated are you to take action on climate change? So if everybody could just, when Ali populates the poll here, input very motivated, I need more information, not interested, or not motivated. And I know we're just sort of at the tail end here, so let's give everybody 20, 30 seconds to get their answers in. And Ali, whenever you're ready, if you want to, whenever you see enough people have responded, if you just close it off, and we'll look at the results when you're ready.
For sure, Scott. Let's give it 10 more seconds just to get a few more replies, and then I'll end the poll and share the results. Okay, a few more answers are trickling in. All right. Okay, so last 2 seconds before, and we're gonna end the poll now. There you go.
Very motivated, 75%, 22% motivated, and just one person representing 3% saying I need more information. So hopefully the one who needs more information will take the opportunity, use some of the resources discussed today and find that additional information. But by all accounts, looks like most of us are quite motivated, which is awesome. One final comment that I wanted to make before I close things off. I did notice in the Q&A, Grant, somebody asked about sharing the videos, including the one about World War II. So if possible, Grant, if you'd be able to share those links with Amy and the BG group, perhaps, and we can see if we can share those out, if that's
Sure.
okay.
They will be part of the recording too, but I will try and share the links.
Perfect. Okay, so Ali, if you don't mind going over to the next slide. So, like me, I expect you all have a lot to reflect on after listening to Grant's terrific presentation, and we hope you'll join us in forging ahead to continue or begin taking action on climate change here at home in Burlington or wherever you are. We'll include the following take action tips in a follow-up email that you'll each receive. We do encourage you to check out BG's Handy Action on Climate webpage. Learn more about the Hub and BG by following us on social media, participating in issues and calls to action, and attending more events. If you're not already receiving BG's monthly newsletter, it's a great way to stay connected and learn more about how to get involved throughout the year. And last, and a top priority is keeping learning and talking about climate change. And Greta said it best. And Ali, if you go to the next slide there. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So when you sign off, you will see a link to a very brief survey on your screen. We'd love to have you complete that. On behalf of Grant, BurlingtonGreen, and the Hub founding members, thank you all very much for enjoying this presentation tonight. And we hope to see you at the next presentation in hopefully the near future. Thank you very much, Grant. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.